Our first speaker is Rabbi David Bleich, who is the Tenzer Professor of Jewish Law and Ethics at Yeshivah University. He is Rosh Yeshivah at Yeshivah University, Rosh Kollel of the Northern Land Kollel. Additionally, he holds a master's from Columbia University, a PhD from NYU. Please join me in welcoming Rosh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Rabbi Cohen, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry. Years ago, I learned something from a 13-year-old bar mitzvah boy. His father was in New York. He was a professor in a French university who had a grant to do research in Rockefeller Institution. And his bar mitzvah was in the shul. He got up and he began by saying, in France, if you're going to talk, you get up and you talk. In America, you have to tell a funny story. His English wasn't all that idiomatic. What he meant is that in this country, speakers often enough begin with a joke of one form or another. Let me begin with a story, but it's not very fun. A story that occurred once upon a time in the middle of the 19th century. A young man assumed the position as rabbi of a smallish town someplace in Europe. Years went by, the family grew, but his salary remained constant. Try as he might, the Balabatim weren't willing to give him an increase in salary. He was a student of Sam Sefer, so he sends off a letter to his Rebbe, and he asks whether he can engage in some type of work action. Does he have to perform all the rabbinic duties if they don't raise the salary? To which the Sam Sefer answered in all seriousness, I know you. I know that if you do not accept a salary as rabbi of the community, you are going to have to find another source of livelihood. And you have every right to do so. But remember that if someone comes to you with a shaila, or they ask you to sit as a dayan nidinter, if it's during the period of time in which you're earning a living, you have no obligation to respond. But I know that you're going to spend the lion's share of the day studying Torah, whether or not you're being paid properly. And if they approach you during the time that you're sitting and learning, the other people, they have priority over you. You'll have to pardon me for entering into an excursus. This tshuva of Sam Sefer, and it's a full-blown tshuva. In the legal world, we would say it's citable. The tshuva of Sam Sefer is a pellet, as far as I'm concerned, or at least it was. The Sam Sefer is telling this man that he has to take time from his learning in order to help other people for whatever they need in terms of Torah. We have a principle, Shalcha Kedem L'Shel Chaverecha. You get priority over other people. The Gemara in Kedushin has a long and involved discussion of whether the Talmud Torah of the son has priority over the Talmud Torah of the father, or vice versa. but certainly one's own limud haTorah has priority over that of others. Secondly, it's not quite certain that answering a shaila is actually Talmud Torah. There's a controversy with regard to Birkas HaTorah. Somebody comes to the Rav, a large shul that has multiple minyanim. Rosh Chodesh. Somebody davened in the first minyan and forgot to say Yalla B'Yalla. And the Rav is davening with the second minyan, and he hasn't said Birkas HaTorah yet. He comes and he asks him, do I have to repeat Shemona Esrei? The answer is a simple yes or no. Controversy whether he's permitted to answer yes or no if he has not yet recited Birkas HaTorah. What is the nature of the controversy? It's not hard to figure out. Is there a fulfillment of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah simply by thinking? If yes, then he can't answer. Because how does he know what to answer unless he thinks? But if he has to make Birkas HaTorah only on what he verbalizes, then if he hasn't verbalized, he doesn't have to recite a bracha. This Rav who's being told that he must interrupt his own learning in order to answer Shaila hasn't really taught anything. The person who asked the question doesn't know why he got one answer rather than another. He's been told something factual with regard to what has been presented to the Rav. It's not at all clear that this is a kiyum of Talmud Torah. More than that, the Chassam Sofer says that he has to interrupt his own study in order to serve as a dayan in a financial dispute. The two litigants haven't the vaguest idea what is at stake. They don't know any of the halakhic principles involved. Even when they get the final decision, the decision is in the form of ploini ato chayiv, ploini ato zakai. One litigant has won the case, and the other has lost the case. The person is no wiser in the end with regard to any principle affecting Talmud Torah. And yet, the Chassam Sofer says, "Vozeh shel chaveru chokedim." Let me try to formulate an answer. This week, we Shabbos Mevorachim, and I understand that frequently the Chazan hears Chanukah in the air, and the recitation of the tefillos of Mevorach Shabbos Mevorachim are often to the tune of Mois Tzur. So let's talk about Chanukah just a little bit. The Gemara asks the question, what bracha do you make on their Chanukah? Asher Kiddushonu Mitzvah V'Tzivonu V'Ad Midnem Shel Chanukah. Ask the Gemara, V'Heichon Histavinu. Where is there a commandment? Where is there a biblical commandment that tells us that we have to light the Ner Chanukah? Ner Chanukah is one of those mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, not biblically required at all. It couldn't have been. It was instituted much, much later in Jewish history. Say takonas kachomi, and my question is, and how can you say to the Rabbi you didn't command this? The Chachamim commanded it, Chazal commanded it, but not the Rabbi Shalom. The Gemara offers two answers. The first one, Rabbi, which everyone knows. Where is the commandment to obey the edicts of Chazal? Good enough. You shall not depart from that which they teach you. Comes Rabbi Nehemiah, and Nehemiah has a different pasuk. Nehemiah has a pasuk of an entirely different kind. He has a pasuk that is not Leisoser Nikol Asher Yerucho. Shal avicha v'yagedecha zekeinecha v'yengro. Shal avicha v'yagedecha. That's simple enough. Magid dvor liyakei chukot mishpotav Yisrael yagerecho v'salmoter. Zekenecho v'yoimru, they shall simply declare it to you. That is the Darabonis. And for Reb Nehemiah, the Gemara doesn't at all indicate why he doesn't use this pasuk. I'm sorry, Rabbi. Rabbi doesn't tell us why he doesn't use Reb Nehemiah's pasuk at all. But one thing we grasp from the Gemara, that this is a pasuk which is the basis of some type of halacha. I would suggest that we're dealing here with two separate inyonim, two separate obligations. One is the obligation of Talmud Torah, and the other is the obligation of Mesorah. Mesorah is usually translated as tradition. I prefer to translate it as transmission. There's teaching. You teach people so that they understand. Teaching isn't simply saying this is permissible, this is forbidden, this is tameh, this is tahar. Teaching is explaining things in context. A psak halacha is not necessarily Talmud Torah. It emerges from Talmud Torah, to be sure, but that is passing on a tradition. The pasuk Zekenecha v'yimru, I think that some Sefer understood as meaning, in addition to Shalom v'yichva, there's also Zekenecha v'yimru. You have to ask to receive this transmission, and that is the simple psak halacha. And yes, even if it's a din Torah, you have an obligation to answer. Because if the dimominus, the jurisprudence of Judaism, is not implied in a concrete case, then the transmission has been lost. That is all part of the Mesoras Ayadus. The Mesorah is crucial. It constitutes its own obligation. And that's what the Chassam Sofer was telling his student. If you're talking to me about the mitzvah Talmud Torah, pure and simple, of course you get priority over other people, unless you're a paid employee and you're being paid to do those things. However, if you're sitting and learning, no one has a claim on your time. If, however, what you're being asked is to transmit Moreshes Yisrael to the next generation, that's an absolute obligation, and it has priority over Talmud Torah. Not only the Talmud Torah of others, but your own Talmud Torah. So, please remember, if you ask Rabbi Cohen Yeshivah, he is not allowed to be paid for answering. However, if you approach Dr. Cohen for a second opinion, please remember to bring along an insurance. Rav Hankins, a friend of Rosh, in his work Aimlessly Yisrael, brings a charge against American Jewry. A terrible indictment. He says that all of us, you, I, and everybody out there, we are all transgressors. We're transgressors because we have failed to fulfill a basic biblical obligation. One of the 613 mitzvahs. Shaftim v'shafrim kitim l'chol b'chol shorecha. Judges and court officials, you shall appoint in all of your gates. The mitzvah is not an easy one to fulfill. The definition of a shofet is someone who has authority. He can impose judgment, he can render a psak, and the psak is absolutely binding upon everyone within his own jurisdiction. In Europe, that was the case. There was a Rosh, there were Dayanim, they were appointed by the Kehillah. The entire community appointed these individuals. And nobody could say, I'm a member of a different shul. Don't bother me. In this country, we have seen what I call the Protestantation of Judaism. Judaism has become a congregational religion. And may even have technical applications in American law. You don't want me to bore you with that. But it has come into being only because we have been remiss in fulfilling the obligation of appointing Botei Din who can exercise authority over the entire community. Yes, we have Rabbonim, we have rabbis, we have Urei Roa, we have Talmidei Chachamim. Everything is wonderful. You either listen to what he says, or you don't listen to what he says. He has no police power. He can't enforce any decision. Then I ask you, what is the function of a Rav in this country? And I think he has an extremely important function. The Rav is the Baal HaMesorah. Forget about imposing the law. Forget about making people obey your decisions. He has to declare and transmit is the crucial word. He has to transmit the Torah as it was given in Sinai. Moshe Kibbutz Torah Sinai, Moshe Yeshua, etc., etc. That is the function of a Rav in this country today. That is the function, first and foremost, of every Rav. In other countries, in other communities, he may have additional powers. But here, he is left only with this stark challenge, the most important challenge, to transmit the Messiah from one generation to the other. And how does he do it? He does it by rendering decisions in Yisrael, matters of religious laws and the even serving as a dayan in disputes between different individuals. That is basically what the Rav today functions in our community. And that is absolutely crucial. But there's more involved than simply answering questions, serving as a dayan, declaring the law. A Baal HaMesorah is charged with acquiring other kinds of information as well. Rav, the Amoira, says, Shmeina Asar Chadoshim Gidalti Eitzel Roya Bachar. I spent 18 months with a shepherd out there. 18 months is a long period of time. I suspect that he must have been learning a little Gemara at the same time. But it took him 18 months to master whatever it is that he wanted to master. Why does he need a shepherd to teach him? An animal, female animal, gives birth to a calf as a Jewish owner. This is the Bechor. It has Kedushas Bechor. Unfortunately, even in Rav's day, there was no Beis HaMikdash. It couldn't be offered as a korban on the Mizbeach. If it develops a mum kavua, then it doesn't have the same Kedusha anymore, and you can do whatever you have to do with it. Otherwise, it's also the Giza V'Aveda. It's what's called in Yiddish a kol shabbat, a holy cow. It can roam and do whatever it wants, causes great damage. So he had to spend 18 months in order to learn how to distinguish between a mum kavua and a mum oiver. Simply learning those distinctions is not necessarily in and of itself Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah are the principles that go into all of this. You can know all that there is to know, and still, when it comes lamasa, you have to apply it in practice. You're at a loss. There's a story, and it's not apocryphal. When I was in the yeshiva, generations of students aren't very long. 2 generations ahead of me, there was a young man who became a distinguished Rosh Yeshiva, and he entered the room for a smicha b'dina. And he was asked in Yiddish, what is the halacha if a woman cleans the chicken and she finds a needle in the stomach of the chicken? And the young man looks at him, at the Bleich, Rosh Yeshiva who was administering the test, and just shrugs his shoulders. Rosh Yeshiva got impatient. This was the Talmud Chacham. Everybody knew it was the Talmud Chacham. And he exclaimed in Yiddish, what's this? Machat hanims of the cave you don't know about. And machat hanims of the kurkuma, the chicken. And you don't know about the needle in the pupik, as they called it in Yiddish. He says, aha, that's different. That I know. When you ask me about the pupik, that I can't tell you. When you ask me about the kurkuma, that I can tell you. That I understand. But that understanding is not enough. You have to be able to relate it to the world in which we live, to apply it in practice. That is all part of the transmission of the Messiah. It's all something that goes beyond. Rav apparently didn't have to know much more than veterinary medicine. Animals had shilas. Humans didn't have shilas in those days, apparently. Today, veterinary degree is not enough. Today, you need a medical degree to be competent to answer the most important shilas. A Rav is the Baal HaMaseret. That's his job. It's a difficult job. And it involves much more than mere book learning. There was a gentleman, unfortunately not living anymore. His name was Rabbi Howard Levine. He wrote a seminal article that had the title, The Non-Observant Orthodox. And in the article, he tells a story. He became the rabbi of an American synagogue in Queens. And when he came to the synagogue, he saw that there wasn't a study for the rabbi. And they asked him, couldn't we find some place to make a study? And one of the good members of the congregation looked at him and said, Rabbi, we thought you already graduated. And the answer is, of course he graduated. A person can graduate. He can know Kol HaTorah Kula, and he still can't be a Baal HaMaseret. Because the Baal HaMaseret has to take his knowledge and apply it practically. For that you need empirical knowledge, among other things. And that is something from which you can never graduate. I can testify that your rabbi has not graduated. I see him in the Beis Medrash all the time. And invariably, he is either coming from the lab or he's going to the library afterwards. That's absolutely necessary if you're going to be proficient in certain areas of the Messiah. All of that and much more is what is required. The function of a Rav is first, foremost, and last to be a Baal HaMaseret, one who transmits from one generation to the next. Or better, one who transmits the wisdom and knowledge that he acquired from the last generation to his contemporaries and those who will follow. There's a famous drasha of Rabbi Shapiro. Rabbi Shapiro once delivered a drasha on Maimon Chazal. Chazal tell us that at the time of Tfias HaMesim, the congregation will arise at the resurrection of the dead, together with their Rabbanim. Each congregation, which is with its robe. I'm not worried about Tfias HaMesim. I'm worried about things that happened long before Tchias HaMesim. Chazal tell us, Hasidim bought the Midrashis, bought the Knesset Shebevovel, the Yikova Eretz Yisrael, the Botei Medrash, the Botei Knesses of the diaspora, will in the days of Mashiach be uprooted and replanted in Eretz Yisrael. Chazal were telling us, of course, everybody knows, the Beis HaMikdash is for Karbonos. You don't go to the Beis HaMikdash to daven Shabbos. But Chazal are telling us, don't expect them to build a gigantic cathedral synagogue so that everyone will be able to daven together. There will be as many shuls and Botei Medrash in Eretz Yisrael as there were in the diaspora. And I ask you, and in these various shuls, Mashiach is one person. Don't expect him to be an itinerant maggid. Who is going to Paskin Shilas? Who is going to teach Torah? Who is going to transmit the Masorah to the generation that is part of the eschatological era? And the answer must be that every shul is going to go to Eretz Yisrael with its Norah D'Asra, and that he will function there in exactly the same way that he functions here. My bracha to all of you is that may you and all of us be privileged to witness the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, and may we be privileged to have many, many years of the tutelage of Rabbi Cohen. May he have a long, long tenure, a tenure that is not up to but not beyond Bias Moshiach, but a Rabbonis that continues way and beyond the coming of Mashiach in the era of Yameinu. Amen.